Hello, class. We will now, in this lecture, look at the content of chapter 1 of the book of Daniel. Let's look in the first two verses, and we'll see the historical setting. We read, "In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it." The events of the book began in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. Nebuchadnezzar's besieging of Jerusalem took place during the reign of Jehoiakim, who was the 17th king of Judah. Jehoiakim's younger brother, Jehoahaz, had been placed on Judah's throne after Pharaoh Necho killed King Josiah in 609 BC. But Necho dethroned Jehoahaz and placed Jehoiakim on the throne. Daniel referred to Nebuchadnezzar as king of Babylon. At that time, which was 605 BC, Nabopolassar was king in Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar had not yet ascended to the throne. However, Nebuchadnezzar, while in battle, heard of his father's death and hastened to Babylon to be enthroned. Writing at a later date, Daniel referred to Nebuchadnezzar as king in anticipation of his occupation of the throne. Let's look at verse 2. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. With the incursion by Nebuchadnezzar, is an important prophetic time period. That is, the time of the Gentiles began with that incursion. By the times of the Gentiles, beginning with Nebuchadnezzar's invasion of Jerusalem in 605 BC, that's when it began, and it will continue until the Messiah returns. Then Christ will subdue nations, deliver the land of Israel from its Gentile occupants, and bring the nation Israel into her own covenanted blessings in the millennial kingdom. God had made a covenant with Israel, we know, back in Deuteronomy chapters 28 through 30, just before the children of Israel entered the Promised Land. In this covenant, God set forth the principle by which he would deal with his covenant people, the Jews. Their obedience to God would bring blessing, but their disobedience to him would bring discipline. The ultimate discipline was the invasion of Gentile nations who would subjugate them to their authority and disperse them from their land. And all this was predicted that it would happen in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 49 through 68. And so now this has come about when Nebuchadnezzar invaded in 605. We see in verse number 3 of chapter 1, "Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of the officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered him to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service." When Nebuchadnezzar returned to Babylon, he brought with him some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. These royal princes may have been considered hostages to ensure Judah's submission, or they may have been taken to prepare them to fulfill administrative leadership positions. These captives were choice young men, both physically and mentally. An attempt was made to assimilate them into the culture of the court of Nebuchadnezzar, for they were compelled to learn both the language and the literature of the Chaldean people. We read in verse number 6. Now among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The commander of the officials assigned new names to them. And to Daniel he assigned the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. 4 captives were mentioned by name here in verses 6 because of their later significant roles. All 4 bore names and honored Yahweh, the God of Israel. Daniel, his name means God has judged, or God is my judge. Hananiah, the Jewish name, means Yahweh has been gracious. Mishael means who is, what God is. And Azariah means Yahweh has helped. Because all 4 bore names that honored Yahweh, their names were changed. Daniel was given the name Belteshazzar, which means Lady, protect the king. Hananiah was given the name Shadrach, which means I am fearful of a God. Mishael was given the name Meshach, which means I am humbled before my God. And Azariah was given the name Abednego, which means servant of Nebo. In verse number 8, we read, But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. The captives were given a portion of food and wine daily from the king's table. However, this food did not conform to the requirements of the Mosaic law of the Jews. The fact that it was prepared by Gentiles rendered it unclean. No doubt many things forbidden by the law were served at the king's table. Also, this royal food had been sacrificed and offered to pagan gods. Similar problems would arise in drinking the wine. The Old Testament prohibited drinking strong drink, so Jews customarily diluted wine with water, some 3 parts of water to wine, other 6 parts water to wine, and some 10 parts water to wine. The Babylonians did not dilute their wine. Daniel's desire was to please his God in all that he did, so he resolved to follow the laws of his people and not the Babylonians by asking permission not to defile himself. Excuse me. Verse 9, Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. The commander of the officials' reticence to grant Daniel's request is understandable. Nobody wants to lose their head. He was responsible to oversee the young captives' physical and mental development so that they would become prepared for the roles the king had in mind for them. These youths had a strategic place in the king's plans, so he wanted them well trained. If the captives had been of little consequence to the king, their physical conditions would not have mattered, and Ashpenaz wouldn't have risked the loss of his life. Daniel had trusted his situation to God, who intervened on Daniel's behalf to move the official's heart to show favor and compassion. We read in verse 11, But Daniel said to the overseer whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Please test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be observed in your presence and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. Daniel, here, look at the bullets underneath the passage. Daniel approached the guard with the commander whom the commander had placed over the 4 youths, and requested a 10-day trial period in which Daniel and his companions were given only vegetables and water. In so short a period, there would have been no marked deterioration that would jeopardize the life of anyone in authority. Since the guard was under the commanding official's authority, he must have acted not on his own, but with permission from Ashpenaz. This indicates God intervenes on behalf of those who trust him and protects and preserves those who obey him, even under pagan rule. Look at verse 15. At the end of the 10 days, their appearance seemed better, and they were fatter than all the youths who had been eating the king's choice food. So the overseer continued to withhold their choice food and the wine they were to drink, and kept giving them vegetables. At the conclusion of the 10 days, the 4 who had lived on vegetables, they were healthier than those who dined on the king's food. Since the 4 looked better, not worse, the guard did not object to the diet Daniel had requested, so they were allowed to continue. Though God did not prohibit eating meat altogether, in the Mosaic law, the vegetable diet was superior to the king's food. Also, this shows that God blesses those who obey his commands and prospers those who trust him. A good principle to remember. Verse 17 reads, "As for these 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams." So we see these 2 bullets underneath that, summarizing what we just read. God gave these 4 knowledge and intelligence in many different realms. Knowledge has to do with reasoning and skills and thought processes. They were able to think clearly and logically, in other words. Intelligence has to do with insight. This points out their ability to discern the nature of things clearly and to interpret them in their true light. Though the knowledge of others in Babylon may have equaled Daniel, he was superior to them all in one area. He had God-given ability to understand visions and dreams. We see in verse 18, "Then at the end of the days which the king had specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and out of them all, not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, so they entered the king's personal service. As for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in all his realm. And Daniel continued until the 1st year of Cyrus the king." So we see after the end of the 3-year period now, in these verses, that the king found that none equaled Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And they entered the king's personal service. In fact, they were many times better than those who practiced the arts of divination. Daniel's ministry in the royal court of Babylon continued until the overthrow of the Babylonian Empire by Cyrus in 539 BC. God had said, "Those who honor me, I will honor." Daniel determined to honor God, even though he was not living where people have the high standards God demanded. He was living among pagans who did not know the God of the Bible. The material for my research for this chapter came from the Bible Knowledge Commentary, the Old Testament edition, and the author of Daniel in this commentary is J. Dwight Pentecost. And that concludes lecture on chapter 1.